who likes to talk, and you just never know when a UPS truck is going to drive down the street and get him excited. So I apologize in advance. As Kara said, I graduated from Maryland in '95, and I majored in marketing. And the world of marketing certainly has changed a lot since I learned about it, but I quickly went into the recruiting field after graduating. And to me, the marketing principles I learned at Maryland were very much sort of, on display in the recruiting field. Companies were marketing themselves to candidates, and candidates had to market themselves to companies. Companies sort of did a better job. They kind of knew their role in the process. They would roll out the red carpet for candidates and offer interviews on college campuses and take candidates to lunch, and would really sort of build an office culture that they believed were important to these prospective candidates. But I think the process of selling oneself from the candidate standpoint has always been a lot less natural. I think we have a lot more tools today to work with. So we'll discuss today how putting on a bit of a marketing hat during your job search may really make for a more effective and even more comfortable experience for you. I feel the need to say that I'm not here to sell anything to you. I loved University of Maryland. I had a great 4 years in College Park. This is really just my opportunity to give back. So I promise there's no sales pitch. I do want to thank Kara for having me. Tita, who isn't on the call, but who has sent Z to help and moderate this. So thank you. I'm really pleased to be here. So some of the advice I'll share today, I think was probably could be applied to the pre-COVID job market. I don't think anybody was interested in listening, probably because the market was so tight and nobody needed to think about changing jobs or finding a job. But I hope that you'll come away with some practices that you can put into place now, and then, perhaps my hope is that you'll keep those practices even once the market recovers. I would love this to be interactive. I don't want to sit up here and talk at you, so please be encouraged to comment, ask questions, use that sidebar, and Kara and Z will help get your questions to me. Also, if there's anything we miss or we can't address, or you feel you want to elaborate on, by all means, we can get in touch after this. All right, so just to give you a bit of a roadmap, we're going to start off talking about what some of the savviest employers are doing and why it matters to us. And then we're going to talk about a job search strategy. And my guess is that many of you don't even realize you have one, but whether it's a strategy of sheer apathy or you're a tiptoer, as 15% of the market is, you do have a strategy. There are so many social media platforms out there that deal with the workforce, but in my opinion, the one that we really need to talk about is LinkedIn. I feel responsible to discuss interviewing and that dreaded experience for many people, especially now that it has shifted to largely a virtual platform. And then I'll try to send you out of here with some actionable advice that you can put in place now and beyond. So the concept of employer branding really first emerged in the 90s. This is right around the time I entered the job market. And it was a very tight labor market. I don't know if anybody remembers the dot-com boom, but it really did make for tremendous competition for talent. And it was the first time we recruiters heard the term the war for talent. That was a term that McKinsey Consulting coined in the late 90s. And it basically sort of explained this extreme competition companies felt they had in attracting top talent. And it also embraced this philosophy that a company's competitive advantage came from the people that work there. So that really created kind of a major organizational change where HR went from being kind of a, well, I should say HR and talent acquisition were one. And it was a very passive process at the time where HR would sort of post jobs and post and pray, as we used to say, and just hope that candidates came through. Once there was a separation of the two, talent acquisition was really sort of this kind of machine that was always in motion, selling the company, building pipelines of candidates, even when they weren't recruiting actively for jobs. So they're the ones who are really masterful storytellers. You'll see them on LinkedIn posting pictures of their company outing at the Nats game when there were Nats games. They would show their participation in the charity fundraiser, and they were really trying to emphasize their corporate culture and their values. And a word about corporate culture, or now culture as it's known, I think there's also been a really big shift there. Used to be that culture sort of was on display in ping pong tables and rooftop happy hours. That was sort of a big 90s thing. Since then, I think there's been a big shift to meaningful issues. You know, is a company protecting its employees during COVID? How are they responding to the Black Lives Matter movement? So things are much more substantive now, and if you spend any time on LinkedIn, you'll see that. I wanted to give you an example from employers of what employer branding looks like, because it's different from consumer branding, although obviously can still help the company. But on the left, you see on SAIC's website, and SAIC is a client of mine, and I think they do a wonderful job of employer branding. But here they show their commitment to the LGBTQ community, and this is something that they have been committed to long before it was, you know, the recent Supreme Court ruling really made this very current. On the right, you see a LinkedIn post from Netflix. And I will say that Netflix has very much been the gold standard for culture. Netflix was the company that introduced the idea of unlimited PTO, which was really groundbreaking at the time. They published a 124-page culture deck that has served as kind of a manifesto of sorts for companies on how to build culture, real culture. They have a podcast, actually fantastic to listen to, called We Are Netflix. Again, just talking about the culture, the recruiting at Netflix. They have a blog. They have very high ratings on Glassdoor, winning awards. So here you see a post about their CEO, Reed Hastings, who donated $120 million of his own money, he and his wife, to historically Black universities. So again, this is a great example of employer branding. So I guess the question is really, you know, why is it important? Why is employer branding important? Why do we care? Well, I think for one, companies want to hire people for whom this stuff matters. So if you are interested in a company or you're interviewing with a company and you don't pay attention to this stuff, they have a really good reason to pass you by. It reminds me a little bit of my son, who is in the middle of college admissions, and I think the same thing holds true. Colleges want people who want to be there, who get them. And so employers are really the same way. It's also important because you have an opportunity to engage with companies and with people and lay the groundwork for relationships that may bear fruit. There's a whole variety of ways that these relationships could benefit you. It isn't always as directly as employment, but you have an opportunity to engage here in a way you really couldn't years ago. It's also important because this effort, this employer branding effort, is very much grassroots. So if you are plugged into the best practices of companies and you find that you are working for a company, you have a way to add value. Let's say you come across that SAIC posting and you want to know what your company is doing about diversity or inclusion, right? You might want to approach them about putting together a plan. On the flip side, if your company is doing something, you know, taking a stand against something, a topic, perhaps you want to share it because it's a grassroots effort to sort of brand your employer as an attractive place to work. So, of course, I should mention every company has its own confidentiality and policy, so you probably need to check that before you share something that could get you in trouble. But generally, employers are really, you know, encouraging of their staff sharing. Lastly, it's important to know what these top companies are doing because companies are always working to build their pipeline. Even now, when so many companies have hiring freezes, they are building their pipeline, building their brand, and they understand that once the hiring freezes lift, it'll make it that much easier to attract talent if they've kind of kept this wheel in motion. And so the question that I will present to you is, why don't employees approach their careers the same way? So especially now, the war has sort of shifted. It's really kind of the war among talent. The burden is really on employers now to, the shift has gone from hunting or finding talent to really assessing talent with a ton of talent applying. So you're competing against many more candidates for fewer jobs. A year ago, the national unemployment rate was at 3.7%, historically low. It is now 13.3%, which is a little better than it was a few months ago. The DC area, which is where I'm based and where I work, is a little bit better. We're at about 10.1%. We were 2.8% a year ago. So things have changed, and there is a bit more of, a lot more competition for fewer jobs. 2020 grads, I will say, are entering one of the worst job markets in decades. They've had internships rescinded, they've had job offers rescinded. So if you're in a position, send a little love their way. They're a pretty grateful bunch. So let's talk about your job search strategy a bit. And again, just, I have to assume that most of you didn't even realize you had one. But really what I would recommend is a job search strategy of regular engagement. I think most people avoid job searching. There's a lot of fears. There's a fear of rejection. There's a fear of the unknown. I think regular engagement really makes job searching easier when the time comes. And for a lot of you, that time is now. I think our polls had 25% of you as unemployed, which is actually fantastic. So that means 75% of you are already thinking about this, perhaps looking at potential layoffs, or maybe you're underemployed. So kudos to you for getting ahead of it. How regular should the engagement be? I get that question a lot. So honestly, daily if possible. Even if you're busy, even if you're working, I would say check LinkedIn once a day. And we'll cover LinkedIn a lot more in depth in the next section, but it's hard to avoid it. I think like a fitness plan or preparing for an exam a little bit every day is better than cramming. If you are actively job searching, I would recommend that you don't measure your progress based on the number of applications you send out. It's really easy to have your resume sort of sit in a vault, especially now with a lot of pipeline building happening and hiring freezes. It's hard. I know you may feel like you've accomplished something if you have sent 20 applications out. I would really suggest you sort of shift the focus more toward number of engagements and number of connections. If you are looking to sort of build your brand, and again, wearing a marketing hat, which I think we should all be doing all the time, you want to build your brand, particularly on LinkedIn, but there are other platforms. We were talking about this earlier, and Z was talking about this a bit, being a subject matter expert, right? There are a lot of people out there who want to hear what you have to say because you work in your world and you know things we don't. So write an article or share an article that you read that really resonated with you and post it with a comment. I will say LinkedIn's algorithm rewards original content. So, it would be nice at times to put things out there that are actually original in thought. Also, take the call from the recruiter. And I'm not saying that to be self-serving. I do think it's a good idea to just listen what the recruiter has to say. If nothing else, you can use it as an opportunity to calibrate. So, I don't know how I got to LinkedIn.
Quick question. I have a quick question and a reminder for everyone to Put your questions in the chat box, please. Also comments, reactions, will bring that up. A quick question on how tight the job market is and how competitive. Does it call for extreme tailoring, or really, because there are so many applications, to sort of change the strategy and, let's say, not send the same resume, or just maybe even slightly change resume, but really try to tailor to the job posting?
Sorry, my screen, let me just go back. I don't know how I lost my way here. Okay, so, so I think what you're asking is, should a candidate tailor their application and their resume based on the job, right? 100% yes. I think everybody should be working off a template, and I think every single resume should be slightly customized for every job. And I think that's always been the case. I know sometimes we have this, you know, the idea that you just sort of blanket the world with your resume, but every job is nuanced differently. And so you really need to kind of pick apart the job description and make sure your resume speaks to it. So yes, absolutely. And I'll go into resumes a little bit at the end. Okay, so LinkedIn. Are there any other questions at this point? We're going to get to sort of the meat of LinkedIn. I know a lot of people are here because they don't feel comfortable with that platform. I am on it all the time. I spend a lot of time, it's sort of my playground, but that is my job to be on it. If you are actively job searching, I would say you might want to make it your job too, to spend a fair amount of time on LinkedIn. I want to sort of scrap a few misconceptions about LinkedIn. I hear a lot, and I'm not even sure that I would have known this. LinkedIn is not really a job searching site. At least it's not really the way they've branded themselves. And now that I hear this, I would certainly agree. They consider themselves a content sharing platform and not a job searching site. Now, yes, of course, there is a job searching tool within it. But I think if you can kind of reframe how you think of LinkedIn, it may help you engage in a more natural way. So I actually reached to my rep on LinkedIn, at LinkedIn, to get a couple of slides because I'm such a fan and like a super user of LinkedIn, and I wanted to make sure I kind of represented that tool properly. So, so my rep sent me this, 690 million members and growing all the time. And I think 637 new data points created every 2 seconds. I mean, this is obviously a global platform and a really great way to just get a sense for the market. If you spend a few minutes on there every day, you will come away with a nugget. I can almost guarantee you. There's no surprise really that the kind of the flow on LinkedIn has increased, right? COVID has driven a lot more people to LinkedIn merely because they're worried about their jobs. They have more confidentiality. You don't have to worry about somebody looking over your shoulder. And I also think there are so many big issues circulating right now that are affecting the workplace that people are really curious to know how this is changing the landscape. So there's been a 40% increase in unique daily visitors. That's pretty amazing to me. And hopefully we'll see an uptick after this because you'll all start to visit regularly. Also, people are interacting more. And what does that mean? Interacting, I mean, I think a lot of people go to LinkedIn and they're kind of voyeurs, right? Like, what's everyone saying on LinkedIn? And they maybe have a profile up there. It might not even be updated. And they kind of jump on and jump off. But the name of the game on LinkedIn is really engaging and being a part of the conversation. And in LinkedIn land, that means liking, commenting, and sharing. And so I would encourage you all to be brave. I know it feels funny to put a comment out there But it'll get more comfortable, and I do think you will start to see a difference in terms of connections and the quality of relationships you're making in the work world.
Lori, we do have one question regarding content from Iris Salita. Thank you, Iris. What kind of topics would you build your brand around?
So it really depends on your line of work. What I love about LinkedIn is that it doesn't have to be so stiff. So I am, of course, in the recruiting field, and I could post something about recruiting, or I could post something about interview tips, and that would be kind of obvious. The post that got the most attention in any post I have ever made was, I think I got like 19,000 interactions, tons of comments. It was a post about preparing my 15-year-old daughter for her first job interview. And, you know, I think I asked the question about, what was your first job interview like? And I mean, from my old boss to heads of HR, it was a topic that people wanted to talk about. I mean, I would never have expected it to be so popular, but it's still within the context of working, but it was maybe a little bit more personal. So I think it seems to me that success stories do very well on LinkedIn. There's a lot of rah-rah and cheering people on. I did see a funny conversation last week on LinkedIn where somebody said LinkedIn success story, and they shared all of their metrics, you know, 150 applications, 20 interviews, 3 offers, you know, finally accepted a job. It's taken me, you know, 3 months. And most people went on, as I did, and sort of, you know, gave her like a virtual fist pump, right? Yay, go you. One person went on with this terrible sort of negative comment about, you know, how insensitive it was to all the other people who were out there and haven't gotten jobs and are struggling to put food on the table. And that stuff doesn't really fly on LinkedIn. So you have to sort of be careful about the way you comment. It does tend to be kind of a positive, you know, almost support group. But I would say anything within the landscape of working. Does that answer your question?
I think so. Thank you.
Okay. So where am I here? Okay. So most executives will tell you that the first place they go when there is an opening on their team is to their network. And your network lives on LinkedIn. So it's not like, you know, it used to be that you had a couple of people to call. I mean, it's easy when you're in the workforce for 15, 20 years to sort of forget about somebody you work with maybe early on, but that person might now be in a position to hire you. So keeping connected with your network, again, engaging, staying in front of them makes a difference. And it's really never been easier to engage. I find people are so much more accessible now. For instance, I follow a Washington exec site, and I saw a CEO received an award about growth. It was like a Fortune 500 CEO. And so I just sent a congratulations to that person, got an immediate reply. So I assume that CEO is manning his own LinkedIn account. You don't ever know, but I do find people are responding more than ever. So now's a really great time. So interviewing. So I would say that if you haven't interviewed in a long time, you probably should just sort of Google some general tips, because I don't want to spend too much time there. Sorry, I think there's like a phantom finger on my.
Lori, we do have one question about LinkedIn.
Okay.
I don't know if you're familiar with the specific feature of listing skills or adding skills. Leslie Lewis, thank you, Leslie, wants to know, sometimes the job shows only 4 out of 9 skills that you match. I guess how important is that with that job posting, and how to overcome that you can only list 50 skills?
Okay, so is this in the context of applying to a job on LinkedIn? Right, okay. So I think that applying to a job on LinkedIn is much like applying to a job anywhere. I wouldn't worry about the match. What is really most important now is standing out from the masses. And the beauty of LinkedIn is generally you can figure out who posted that position. There's a recruiter that either posted the position or the job is aligned to a recruiter, and it makes it a lot easier to connect and follow that person. That is fair game, by the way. If a recruiter posts a position and you want to connect with that recruiter, you can do that. Recruiters don't mind, they're out there for that. So if you've pulled up the profile of the hiring manager, you get to you have intel into what that person's like. Maybe they went to University of Maryland. Maybe you share, a church group. You can now turn around and send a letter or send a message on LinkedIn that makes a much deeper connection than your resume would ever do by matching up with skill words. Okay. I thought for sure that was going to trigger more questions because I know people are always sort of shocked that I say you can reach out and connect to the hiring manager. Okay, so interviewing. Yeah, so I don't want to spend too much time here except to say that I have kind of, I think, beaten this topic to a pulp here in terms of like doing your research and knowing. So obviously when you're interviewing with a company, you need to do your research. There's really no excuse not to understand what a company's all about, who their CEO is, what their ratings are on Glassdoor, what is their employer brand, what are they telling you is important to them. You've never really had more opportunities to do that, and it's a huge missed opportunity to show up ill-prepared. One thing that is so awkward for everybody is the discussion of comp. It irks recruiters to no end to get to the 11th hour before you are willing to share comp. So you're probably going to be asked about your comp expectations fairly early in the process. You don't have to share what you are currently making. In fact, there is some legislation that's circulating around the company. I think Maryland's probably closer to passing it than Virginia. But it's part of the Equal Pay Act. There is legislation that is to protect women and minorities. So the thinking is if you don't share what you're currently making, you're not going to base your next salary on that. So you only need to share what your requirements are. It's smart to be flexible, and I think it's smart to give a range, but you are going to probably have to give that up front so that you're qualified and dismissed if you're not anywhere in the same ballpark. Any questions on comp? Okay. The virtual interview is the new norm. 16% of companies, of surveyed companies, were taking advantage of virtual interviews before COVID. 40% are now, and I imagine that number will continue to grow. So the same rules apply. I mean, your physical background matters. You don't want a cat walking across the background. You probably don't want offensive art. To put yourself in a clean space, dress professionally from the waist up. I mean, for all you know, I could be wearing my terrapin pajamas on the bottom, and think about these things. It's also hard to establish rapport on a virtual interview. So do your best to sit up straight and smile and nod your head. I mean, I can't see all of you, but I can read into your level of engagement based on body language. So that makes a big difference, especially because usually these first rounds of virtual interviews are very quick. Recruiters are really in kind of back-to-back first round interviews. So they get to establish the tone and the pace, which means you have to be careful not to wax on too long about any one topic. I think much to Z's point, or I think this was a question, do you want to tailor your resume? Absolutely. I would say in preparing for any interview, I would print out the job description, I would print out your resume, I would underline, highlight, circle things, and make sure you are clear on where the crossovers are. Be prepared to give some examples about, things you've done that speak to what the job is asking of you. I also, and this was advice pre-COVID, make sure you ask some substantive questions. I mean, certainly you should always be armed with a couple of questions before any interview, but the questions should not be questions that you can get by Googling the company, right? How many employees do you have? You can figure that out. Where are your offices? And who are your clients? I think most of those things are pretty well communicated on, online. I'd rather see you ask a question like, I see on your website that your, collaboration is listed as one of your core values. What have you been able to do during COVID with everyone working virtually to maintain that level of collaboration? Something, again, that sort of shows that you've done your research, that asks for, a little bit more insight into the company that you can't just get from a Google search. If it's
Lori,
on the resume, be prepared to talk about it. Sometimes people get asked questions about their resume and they seem like they have no idea where that came from. So you should know when you worked for a company and the order of events and type. I mean, if it's on there, be prepared to talk about it. And I've had clients who have interviewed candidates line by line down the resume, which is really, for some of us, going back fairly far. After the interview, you are still interviewing. If you didn't get the job, you are still interviewing. If somebody else got the job over you, you're still interviewing. And sometimes those moves you make right after that can make or break the situation. I have a friend who interviewed for a position, is in HR. She was working, but she really wanted this position, didn't get it. She followed up with an email afterwards, thanking the hiring manager, complimenting that company on the process, and just keeping the door open that if anything were to ever come, she would love to be considered. They ended up creating a position for her and hiring her within a month. Okay, so just remember.
Lori, a quick question about
informational interviews and how to approach them. Sudipya Chini, thank you. A question of using LinkedIn and direct messaging for that.
Using direct messaging on LinkedIn?
To approach someone about a potential informational interview or any
Absolutely.
other tips.
Tips on it. I mean, I think anytime you're approaching somebody cold, you want to introduce yourself in a way that's a little bit more compelling. I mean, we all get these kind of generic introductions that, oh, we're connected by somebody, or could you please help me? But I think writing a somewhat, short but compelling message to explain, how you've perhaps admired the company or you've been following their posts and, you are really interested in learning about what the company does, and could you please provide, would you mind giving me 15 minutes on a phone call so I can learn from you? I mean, again, people are really accessible right now, so it's a great time to do that, and that's a really great idea.
Thank you. We have a question about comp that came in a little late.
Yeah.
How do you know your worth? Sometimes Glassdoor or other tools aren't as straightforward, and that's a question from Kalika. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I mean, I think there are lots of resources on comp. I mean, there are salary surveys published all the time, and I think it's wise not to rely on any one site. But I think if you're looking at several different sites, you can get a range just to know if you're in the ballpark or what you can expect. So I would encourage that there, you're looking at several different sites. If you find yourself far outside of what these sites are telling you is common, you may have to do some adjusting. It probably is obvious that I think every interview should be followed up with a thank you. You know, in the olden days where you could get, the olden days, you know, like January, where you could be flown across the country for an interview, whether it's that or you are simply being interviewed over Zoom, always send a thank you. Sending a thank you email is perfectly fine. If you don't have an email address, sending a message on LinkedIn is perfectly fine. I'm not a fan of group emails for thank you. So if you get a panel interview, I don't love having an email to all 3 people. I think they should be personalized to each one. And I think if you don't hear back from a company after an interview, it's okay to follow up, but I think you need to really be patient and reasonable because companies are, you know, in a state of flux as well. A lot of them are dealing with layoffs and reorgs and all kinds of, you know, hiring freezes and things. So, you know, again, you don't want to come across as aggressive, but you do want to follow up. And I would say once a week is probably reasonable. So I think that's sort of what I have to say on interviews. Is there anything anyone wants to share there? We've got on interviews. Okay. Oh, I've even heard that some companies are doing drive-through interviews, that's new. I mean, there's now virtual job fairs, which is interesting. I don't know if Maryland will be doing anything like that, but drive-throughs, that seems kind of new. I guess it's like, my husband's sending me messages through the door. I've been practicing on him for weeks. Okay, so the post-COVID workplace. I don't see us going back to offices like we were before. I think the remote office is here to stay even long after COVID. I think virtual interviews are here to stay, virtual meetings, virtual happy hours. I think we have to get comfortable talking into a screen, I'm sorry to say. But what that means for somebody who is job searching or for somebody who is passively looking to engage is that you get to cast a wider geographic net. I mean, location, commute, that was a huge differentiator for somebody. I mean, all the candidates I spoke to would say, I'm perfectly happy in my job, but if you could get me closer to home, I would love to shorten my commute. Commute is not a hot topic right now. And I think even once people are comfortable going back to the office, the idea of remote work is going to stay pretty popular. So that means that you can now connect with companies and look at opportunities on the West Coast. I mean, maybe, you know, it's Maryland to Virginia, but I mean, who's to say you aren't going to look at Netflix now? I think this is very much the new norm. So I think it does really allow for more opportunities as you're looking at potential companies to work for. This is also a slide I got from LinkedIn because I was so curious about the direct impact to LinkedIn with COVID. And as you'll see, 43% are now expressing an interest in remote jobs. I mean, I imagine part of that is sort of the immediate COVID risk where people don't want to go into an office, but I do think this is going to stick around. I heard on a podcast yesterday that Peter Drucker, who was a leader I used to follow in the 90s, predicted this shift to the remote workforce like, 25 years ago. So we sort of had our hand forced during COVID, but I do think this is sort of where things are heading. So remote jobs are up. I think you obviously we know that hiring is down. And I want to just kind of talk a little bit about these, let me see where we are here. Okay, so these industries, I've done a lot of listening to LinkedIn on, what recovery is going to look like and which industries are, more COVID proof. It sounds like the finance and tech sectors have shown resilience. And I think partially that's just because they translate well to a virtual office. And I think they will continue to hire. So I think we'll see that. Industries like education, training, mortgage underwriting, those are really moving to digital platforms. So I think digital literacy is a huge asset. So for anyone who has extra time, who wants to sharpen their saw, I think those are skills that are going to be really desirable in the years ahead. And then as you can see here, we all know that recreation and travel has taken a hit. Wellness has taken a hit, but I think that's going to kind of reemerge in a new platform. And you can see that there's been an uptick in telecom, no surprise, cybersecurity, no surprise, and then logistics and supply chain. So again, if you're looking at industries, if you're looking for a career change, although this isn't the best time to probably do that, those are industries you might want to start to follow. So, oh, one thing I wanted to mention also, I heard this a lot from recruiters that, we've already sort of entered this artificial intelligence world where, computers are trying to replace humans in every possible way. And as that happens, I think the soft skills like communication and empathy really go a long way. And I think that these platforms, LinkedIn in particular, I think allows for that in ways that maybe we didn't have, access to before. So humility, flexibility, all of these things are really important. They go a long way. In the flexibility department, I will say you might find that you're not going to get your dream job right now, depending on how active your search is. You might find yourself open to project work or contract work. A lot of companies are shrinking headcount and putting on these hiring freezes. So that can be kind of a way around it. Okay, so just to kind of recap so that you feel you're leaving here with some actionable advice. I feel like I said my piece on LinkedIn. Be brave, post, update, follow companies, cheer people on, they really need it. Avoid politics, which is probably trickier advice because everything has sort of been politicized lately. So you have to be careful about what you like and comment on. That's all part of your history. I would not air your grievances on LinkedIn, certainly not about your former boss or former company. Really try to use it in the most positive way possible. Again, send notes. Try to be original and fresh. Try not to be generic when you send notes, trying to connect to someone. Also, I would follow companies that you're interested in. So for one, I hope you've all followed the University of Maryland Alumni Association page, right? I assume they're on LinkedIn, but I imagine Facebook and some of the other platforms. So a little shout out to the Alumni Association. I love following thought leaders. Carly Fiorina, who's a proud alum of the Smith School and a former presidential candidate. She's constantly putting things out there. Brene Brown, I'm a big fan of. I'll sort of buy anything she's selling. Simon Sinek is a wonderful thought leader. And there's quite a few others. So you can sort of follow these public officials like you would, or public personalities like you would on any other platform. And I would encourage you to do that. If you are actively job searching, you should mark yourself as such on LinkedIn, because recruiters see that when we have like certain recruiter memberships, and we can see when somebody is open to opportunities. Now, your employer can too. So if you're passively looking or you want to keep your search on the down low, you have to be careful about that. This is the hard part. I feel like it's counterintuitive, but once you land a job, stay connected and stay engaged. And make sure to thank people who helped you along the way. If somebody opened a door for you or made an introduction for you, you don't need to send them chocolates, but a simple email or message goes a long way. And be creative. I mean, not, again, this was, I think, an earlier question, like what is okay to post? Again, LinkedIn is not Facebook. It's not a dating site. Don't try to ask anyone out over LinkedIn. That's not going to go over well. But not every interaction is really about applying for a job. A lot of it is just putting yourself out there. I'll share a quick story that worked for me in this context. So last year, the Nats won the World Series. If anybody remembers baseball. So I, being a company that's based here in the DC area with all DC clients, I just posted something on LinkedIn with that picture of the Nats rushing the mound and congratulated the Nats on winning. And it's hard not to like a post like that. But what came from that was an email I got from a fellow recruiting agency CEO who invited me to join in a group of other business owners for season tickets on the Nats, like right along the first base line. So, we'll see what happens next season, but that hasn't really come to fruition. But anyway, that's just an example of the fact that I put myself out there at a time when I think, they were looking for someone else to join this group. And it was sort of a wonderful benefit. Make a list of target companies. And again, you can really shoot the moon here. It might be Tesla. Maybe you love Tesla or Nike or Apple. Follow them because again, you can get the best practices from them. You can help your company be better, and you can start to figure out what's important to you when you look for a company. Or maybe you want to work for those companies and you want to just sort of keep up with them until an opportunity comes and the timing is right. You can engage with them. You can share their posts. You can comment on things. They're not shy about putting things out there. Interact as much as possible. Take the recruiter's call. Don't over apply. I think it really doesn't look great when you apply for every job. I think you start to lose credibility when recruiters see that you've, applied to a ton of jobs, many of which don't match your qualifications at all. So be sort of selective and realistic, really. I would rather see you reach to a person, a hiring manager, introduce yourself, and just lay the groundwork for an informational meeting than have you apply for a job that is nowhere near your skill set. And yes, customize your resume every time you send it out. Get a second set of eyes on it. Try to change it, so that it speaks to the employer. There is a Facebook group out there. I know we haven't talked about Facebook much, but there is a Facebook group out there called Free Resume Review if you need help. I think a lot of recruiters are happy to give their time. So you can get help on that site.
Lori, a question about resume
Sure.
from Rachel Lind.
Okay.
What is the new normal for resume? Now I have 12 years of experience. Can it be 2 pages?
Yes. 2 is fine. 4 is not. It doesn't have to list everything you've ever done. It should really list your accomplishments. It's just but I think 2 is fine. And I think if you're a recent grad, it should probably be 1. But if you have substantial work experience like you do, by all means, 2 pages is fine.
A question from Kalika. Is there any value in having your resume professionally written?
Yes. I don't think it's necessary right now because I think there are so many recruiters who are happy to give their time to help now. I mean, we recruiters have a lot more time now to spend with candidates because a lot of our clients have put their hiring on hold. So I would start with the free services like this Facebook group. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, you want to feel really proud about your resume. It should be pretty close to perfect. There shouldn't be typos. It should represent you. It should feel like yours. And if you're not getting what you want from free help, by all means, pay for it. So we're almost at 1 o'clock. I would be remiss if I didn't try to get you to connect with me. So my email is not hyperlinked. So but I can send this out later, I suppose. And we can send a follow-up, Kara, right, with my contact information.
Yep.
I really want to connect with you. I want you all to connect with me. I'd love to see you connect with each other. I want to see you be brave and post and share and start to, you know, one step at a time, engage. I really do love when people reach to me 5 years later and say, oh, I remember you told me to shoot for the moon and now I'm working for Tesla and maybe you could be a client then. Okay, see, I did sell. I couldn't help it. Anyway, I really hope you'll engage with me and each other, and hopefully that will all translate into you getting the work you want and finding, you know, enjoyment in it. And I hope you all stay safe and sane, and go Terps.
Go Terps indeed. Z, thank you for moderating today, obviously. And Lori, thank you for your presentation. It looks like we've covered all of our questions. You actually covered one question that was whether you'll share your slide deck. So we will try include that in the email, as well as Lori's contact information and a recording of the webinar. So thank you everyone for joining. If you have any questions directly for me from the Alumni Association, or for Z in the Northern Virginia area, or Lori, I can send out all of that contact information, or you can ask me directly. You have my email and I can kind of go from there. So thank you. Go Terps. Everyone stay healthy and have a great day.
Thank you. Bye all.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.